Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. 15-term Texas Democratic Congresswoman Bernice Johnson says she will not seek re-election when her current term is up. Johnson marks the 16th House Democrat to announce intentions to leave Congress, and that makes the Democrats' shrinking margin even more narrow. Meanwhile, the president and first lady are visiting service members and their families in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. After the administration's big social and climate spending bill cleared the House late last week, it is now in the hands of the Senate to determine if the president can score a second win on his big spending bill. With Congress out for Thanksgiving this week, it's unclear how much will get done. After weeks of speculation, we learned today that Jerome Powell will be renominated for a second term as chair of the Federal Reserve. The announcement has already drawn criticism from progressive Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, who has called the Trump-appointed Powell a, quote, failed leader, who she says has overseen what she calls a culture of corruption. The president is also receiving regular updates on a tragedy in Waukesha, Wisconsin, where a man drove into a Christmas parade yesterday afternoon, killing 5 and injuring at least 40. We'll have the latest on that investigation in a moment. But first, let's bring in Ed O'Keefe, Natalie Jennings, and David Siders. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Natalie is the deputy Washington editor at the Washington Post. And David is a national political correspondent at Politico. Welcome. It's good to talk to you all. Ed, let me start with you. President Biden announced today that he is nominating Jerome Powell for another term as chair of the Federal Reserve. What reasons did he give?
Essentially, stability. That he has been running the Federal Reserve since before the pandemic, through the pandemic, and now as it comes out of the pandemic, and that he wants that stable leadership to continue. The other reason, I think, that you mentioned the criticism of Elizabeth Warren, and we'll probably hear it from a few other liberal senators or more progressive senators, but he almost immediately earned some Republican support. This is a nominee who will pass with bipartisan support in the Senate. And this is a White House that's keenly aware that a little bit of bipartisanship goes a long way these days, because you don't have Republicans with too many opportunities to vote for something that the president does, rather mostly against something. And they want to keep somebody in place that could potentially help with that. But I think more than anything, there was an understanding that the economy is coming out of this pandemic, obviously dealing with what Powell called today a burst of inflation, and what the White House and the Fed hope will only just be a burst of inflation. And that he's got the tools and the know-how to bring us out of that and move the economy forward. That and simply he's had a good relationship with this president, and comes with the backing of Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen as well, who used to, of course, hold that position and had worked with Powell at the Federal Reserve as well. So perhaps not a surprise. The markets have been waiting for this one. The fact that they announced earlier this morning, or sent word that they would be announcing it before the markets even opened, was a signal that the status quo would be maintained and Powell would get another term.
Meantime, David, last week the House passed the Biden administration's spending and climate bill. As it heads to the Senate, what do we know about where the key senators Manchin and Sinema stand on it?
I think the Democrats are optimistic that talks with them will produce something, but clearly we know what we've known all along, which is that they're skeptical of the size and scope of this, and I think it's still really an open question as to what comes to the table.
So, meantime, Natalie, the Washington Post is reporting on a number of newly elected Trump-aligned members gaining influence in Congress. How are they driving the agenda?
There's a couple of dynamics that you have to remember in order to understand why you're seeing so much influence in the hands of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz. These people are Trump loyalists to the core, but the House is also looking at very likely changing hands to Republican majority next year, just the way the map is drawn and what, the political currents right now facing the Biden administration. Kevin McCarthy really wants to be House Speaker, and he has to do that by keeping all of his caucus together, and that means appeasing people who are very loyal to Trump, who have a direct line into Trump, who then have a direct line to Kevin McCarthy. So these people who are extreme in ways that you maybe didn't see extreme former Republican members of Congress having a big microphone have a lot of influence now because of the political dynamics they see coming down the pipe.
And, I'm wondering, Natalie, what is it that Republicans privately might be saying about this sort of, strategy here moving forward? Because some have pointed out that, it forces this discussion about whether or not one agrees with the former president's view of the 2020 election, and could put potentially some Republicans in some very difficult positions. Although we saw in Virginia, for instance, Glenn Youngkin, the Republican candidate there, now the governor-elect, managed to focus on something quite different than the former president. I'm just wondering what you're hearing privately from Republicans on that, with this sort of ascension of this group, but still these very difficult conversations that seem to be taking place, at least in some circles, in some Republican circles.
Yeah, there's certainly Republicans who will say privately, and some even members of Congress who will say publicly that, they don't understand why these members who hold views that they find pretty abhorrent are getting so much influence. But they also recognize that, one, voters sent them there, so there is a constituency for them. And they also recognize that whether or not they dislike them, that they all will be more powerful if they are in the majority. And to get there, they have to do it together and hold their nose and do some things they don't like. And they sort of are giving their leadership a little bit more understanding for tolerating some of the things than they otherwise would have, because they have this big goal ahead. But there's no, it's not like there's not distaste privately, but sometimes the overall goal is winning out. It seems like, in the greater macro conversation, that is the force that's driving everything here, is seeing the possibility to come back into power.
Well, Ed, Natalie mentioned the currents that the Biden administration was facing, these political currents. Now, with the passage of infrastructure and the social spending bill on the docket, have President Biden's and the Democratic Party's prospects improved at all?
Not quite yet, at least if you believe the latest CBS News polling, as you should, which showed that just terrible ratings for the president regarding his handling of the economy. And unless and until inflation really starts heading in the opposite direction, should we anticipate at this point that his numbers overall will begin creeping back up, because the economy remains such a chief concern for voters, and right now they don't like the way he's handling things. The numbers we had in our surveys, show that while voters understand what's causing inflation, the pandemic, other natural supply and demand concerns, and that it's not a partisan or political issue, they're holding him accountable. And that's what happens when the economy is in bad shape. Americans hold the party in power accountable. Right now, that's the president and congressional Democrats. So it's why you saw him today, again, in that conversation about Jerome Powell's nomination, talking about the fact that there's been record job creation, that the economic growth is headed in a positive direction, and that Powell helps maintain stability in that rebound from the pandemic. And while Powell mentioned a burst of inflation, he says confident that by the spring we should start to see things turn around. And most economists you would talk to say the same, that the supply and demand issues are going to sort themselves out. Those issues at the ports across the country are going to sort themselves out. So the question will be, coming into the spring, do the numbers improve because the economy is improving, or does he continue to potentially struggle, even with members of his own party? If you look again at our poll, there was a big section on immigration this time, which is a good subject to continue to gauge, because it's such an urgent concern to so many across the country. And you notice in those numbers that about a third of liberals say this president has not yet followed through on campaign promises to tackle that complex issue. So in those numbers, as well as in the economic numbers and in his overall approval, you're seeing even weakness among the base. Concern that he hasn't necessarily done enough, that they haven't seen the effects of his work. That's something that this White House understands they're going to have to focus on going into the new year, especially because it could take a while for much of that money from both the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better Act, if it ever passes, to actually get into the system so that people start to see the tangible benefits of those pieces of legislation. So right now, not necessarily on the rebound just yet, because Democrats understand, A, it's only been about a week, and B, they've got to get out there and sell this thing, and they plan to do so in the coming weeks.
So, David, jumping off of Ed's point there, I mean, given everything that Ed just laid out and how challenging the landscape will be in 2022 for the Democrats, just how critical is this social spending bill here? Democrats are in this unique position of being on the verge of potentially passing it. But as Ed points out, right now, the numbers at least look very dire for the administration and for Democrats.
That's right. I think necessary but not sufficient. And I think Ed is exactly right. This is existential crisis kind of time for the Democratic Party. You look at them passing really major pieces of legislation, the COVID relief bill earlier this year, infrastructure, and yet not getting benefit at the polls. And you can hear, the White House puts a brave face on this, and Democrats in the party do as well. They say, we're going to sell this better than we sold Obamacare. State parties are holding events basically every 7 minutes in everywhere. But we've had a few months since this huge COVID relief bill, and that didn't do Biden any favors. I don't think there's a heck of a lot of reason, if you're a Democrat, to be optimistic that roads and bridges will have voters dancing in the streets next year. The overwhelming dynamic is just so poisonous for the Democratic Party that I think most level-headed Democrats say, we definitely lose the House, the Senate's in play.
David, I'm just curious, to what do Democrats privately attribute that to? Is it messaging, do they think? Is it the way in which these things have been talked about or perhaps not talked about, some Democrats perhaps might say? What do they think is behind that sort of disconnect or the inability, they say, to have this sort of connection between these achievements and then the corresponding bump in the polls and in approval ratings?
I think, first of all, you hear it all over the place. You hear some moderate Democrats say it's progressives, and you hear progressives say it's that we're running people like Terry McAuliffe who are too buttoned up and Clinton-esque. So there is some agreement that there's a messaging problem, but it's also about it's not just how you're selling, but how you're packaging these proposals, right? I think the realization now is that Democrats have lost this economic populism argument to Republicans, which boggles their minds because they're passing this legislation that is helpful to people, working class people. And that disconnect, I think, I think it's really hard to understand. I guess that's how I come to it.
Well, so Natalie, on this point, last week Senate Democrats reportedly met with pollsters to discuss election losses in Virginia and New Jersey and to adjust messaging. What are the big concerns inside the Democratic Party right now?
A lot of what David just said and Ed was saying earlier, that they don't know if these policies that they are pushing, that they have been focused on, are going to be enough. The writing is very bad on the wall right now for Democrats to keep the House. And so we are seeing a little more focus from them, sort of getting ready to retain the Senate if they possibly can. They are running there in more favorable territory. Republicans have some candidates there who are not exactly Glenn Youngkins in terms of no problematic appeal to people. So they may be banking on a little bit of luck there. And, they do think that their policies are correct. They're just not sure if they're selling them in a way that's going to resonate with voters who have to kind of do a 180 in a lot of cases before this time next year. And that's not a lot of time for all these new policies to kick in and really be felt.
Well, Ed, ahead of the holiday, the president is set to discuss the economy at a time when inflation is making the holiday season more expensive. What should we expect in his remarks tomorrow?
Yeah, we are expecting him to talk a bit about inflation, yet again acknowledging that this is going to be a more expensive holiday season and travel season for Americans than it has been perhaps in years past, although he will also most likely make the point, hey, this is better than it was last year, right? Because last year you probably didn't get to have it with anyone outside of your own pandemic bubble. We're also waiting to see whether he will make good on some reports today that the U.S. will open up its strategic petroleum reserve to help ease gas prices, but that may happen in coordination with other countries around the world. There has been pressure applied by the Americans on India, South Korea, Japan, and others, where non-OPEC nations, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, that have decided so far to not necessarily boost supply to bring down those prices. So watch for that tomorrow. If that were to come, an announcement that he's doing that, just as Americans are packing up the trunks and heading out to grandma's house for the holiday, I'd be curious to see if by next week people don't feel at least a little better that at least the White House is trying to do something about this, or if they're just going to continue to hold it against them and perhaps argue that they could have done this sooner. So expect to hear some more tomorrow on ways that this administration is dealing with inflation, but also pushing the idea that with unemployment down, with the economy continuing to grow, and with retailers saying that the store shelves are going to be stocked and that the supply chain issues are being alleviated, that it should be an interesting set of remarks by him as he then heads Tuesday night to Nantucket, the island off of Massachusetts, where he'll be celebrating Thanksgiving with his family, continuing a tradition that began in the 1970s for them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see as well, Ed, because whether or not people actually kind of are able to, amidst the holiday bustle, have that messaging by the president break through. We will be watching. Ed O'Keefe, Natalie Jennings, and David Siders, thank you all very much.